My name is Dr. Vincent Minjares. I'm a program manager for the Aspen Institute Sport and Society program. Thanks for coming. Love the turnout for this session. This is a really cool topic. Obviously, coaching, I think, is striking a chord in a lot of folks. We're going to talk about a very specific dimension of coaching here today with our amazing panel. I'm going to sort of do a couple things here. They're standing there because they're going to actually be presenting before we get into our discussion. We'll do a very short presentation from each of them to give you a sense of what they're up to in this space. I will set that up with a few kind of context slides for all of you. And then we'll get into a Q&A after I discuss with the panel some questions about understanding impact of coaching and coach training. So I think it's a really nice segue from the previous session. Anybody attend the previous session? Right, so that whole last bit around data and research and also education and training, this sort of like merges those together. So this is an important deeper dive into the layer around our, really strengthening our capacity as a sector around coaching. And so we know there's been lots of calls for more coach training. There's been lots of calls for coaching that's youth development focused. There's so much amazing work that's happening in this space, but we also know there's a capability piece that we want to continue to grow across these different environments. So we'll set that up with a couple things. First, I gotta turn this on, hey. 2019, Aspen partnered with Susan Cran Exchange and researchers from Harvard to really, I think for us, dive into the question of developing social, emotional, educational competencies and skills in young people. And we developed calls for coaches as an initial sort of set of recommendations based on research around what coaches can do in this space. Obviously, there's a ton of work happening. There's so much research on positive youth development. There's so much research on social and emotional learning. There's so much work on different facets of this. This was sort of one thing that we did to add to the marketplace. And I think it's an interesting piece because when you look at some of the suggested behaviors that came out of it, it's things that make sense whether you're in sport or not. Some would argue it's just good coaching of people. And that sort of set us on a pathway to really dive deeper into some of these issues. One particularly important piece, obviously, as I spent a lot of time in the last session on, was the National Coach Survey, which, again, Susan Cran Exchange, Nike, and our work with the research team at Live Sports at Ohio State, dove even deeper into, not just training in SEL, but training in many different competencies that one would argue is youth development focused, and we obviously identified a range of different training interests that were really important. Now we're fully engaged in the Million Coaches Challenge, which is an effort to train 1 million coaches in youth development practices and skills. We have an amazing network of organizations who are committed to this with the support of SCE, and we're working really hard to get more coaches trained. There's a next step piece to this, right? Which is, let's say we get all these coaches trained, then what, right? And I think the sort of guiding question of what happens after training is the question of how do we know it's working? What's happening after they sit in that session or spend those 4 or 5 weeks or complete that online module? What happens after they complete this work, right? And so a couple things just as a point of reference. The Million Coaches Challenge, and we're really proud of this. So obviously last year we shared a belief statement about the importance of coach training. This year, in your bags that you should have received this morning, there was a statement of impact. That's sort of a impact in quotations, I suppose. One of the things that we've done is we've canvassed our organizations who are engaged in training, and we've asked them to share out. What are some of the things that you're seeing through your own evaluation process about the impact of the training that you're offering? So this is sort of an early insight into where our organizations are at. And that's also been supported by some research by the American Institutes of Research, who's doing an implementation study. They've done a coach perception survey that's also factored in. So there's some really interesting data that we're gathering on that. I'm not going to spend time talking about that. Katlin will share some of her own work in this space, because the U.S. Soccer Foundation is part of the Million Coaches Challenge. But we're in a really good place of now turning the conversation from let's get coaches trained to let's understand the impact of training. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to invite our three panelists. I will introduce them now, and then I will have Keely come up first. Keely Stern is the Vice President of Research, Data, and Strategic Initiatives at Resonant Education. Raise your hand a little bit higher, Keely. Yep, that's right. Can we give a round of applause for Keely? Ryan Graff is the Vice President of Programs for the First Tee Foundation. And Dr. Katlin Okamoto is Director of Coach Mentor Training for the U.S. Soccer Foundation. So Keely's going to come up now and is going to walk through a really interesting tool that we've worked really closely with Resonant on. It's called From the Huddle. It's an amazing self-assessment tool for coaches. We're really, really proud of this work and really thankful for the work that Keely and the Resonant team have put in. So.
Okay, using the fake mic now. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, From the Huddle, clicker movement. That's me. Okay. If y'all were also looking in your packages that you got this morning, you might have noticed this postcard. And this is all about From the Huddle, which is also the title of this session. The great part about talking to this incredible room is that I don't have to convince anybody in here that coaches do so much more than just teach technical skills. Like, they do so much. They are incredible humans. I know many of you in this room are coaches, and so I'm here to explain about a tool that dives into those other skills that coaches are being asked to do. So the social and emotional skill building that is part of the incredible experience of sports. I don't even need to share like a personal story about how a coach saw me when I was growing up outside of my technical skills, helped me through a tough time. Like, y'all already know that. So what is From the Huddle? As Vince mentioned, we have two different versions of survey tools. Resonant Education is a survey research firm, so we develop and design surveys with experts in the field. So the expert in this field was the Aspen Institute and their calls for coaches. So they have the content knowledge and the expertise. We brought our survey research expertise, designing items and the logistics as well, because we also own our own software platform, so we can do the online data collection and online reporting and data visualization for folks. So From the Huddle helps coaches identify their strengths and areas for growth in the realm of building social and emotional skills with their athletes, using that space in a way to model and name important coaching behaviors. There's a self-assessment tool, and that's actually free right now. So I'm going back here. There's a QR code on this. There's going to be a QR code on the next slide, next two slides, where y'all can all take it. You can pass it to your coaches. We encourage everyone to take it because we find it very helpful. And there's also a 360-degree feedback form that's going to pull in those other stakeholders. So your parents, and most importantly, that youth voice from your athletes. So asking them to tell us how frequently and how consistently are their coaches performing positive behaviors. Does the coach know the athlete's name? Are they using it, the preferred name? Do practices start on time? Are you having meetings with parents? And all of these come directly from the actions outlined in the calls for coaches. So, two versions. Biggest takeaways here, they are both online, so you can take them from any device that connects to the internet, and they're based on Project Play's calls for coaches. There's that QR code. So the real value we found here is that it's all about the coach and getting the coach the data they need any point in time they want. They can take it as many times as they want, but it's all about measuring their own practice. And it goes a little bit beyond a checklist. Checklists are awesome, use them all the time. But we use frequency scales, Likert scales, so how much do you agree or disagree, to kind of broaden that reflection activity with the coach. And they go through a series of questions and then click submit, and get those results directly back to them over email. So they don't have to wait for someone else to give them results. They can do this at midnight when they have, the 1 second of free time because they're a coach. And the awesome thing is they can go through all of the calls and really identify areas of strength and areas for growth. Yeah, they're just for the coach too. I find, reflecting on my own practice kind of a vulnerable activity. So this isn't going to your organization. This is just for your own professional development. The 360-degree approach is like, I don't know, I'm sure some of you have done this in your employment, where it's get your peers, do a self-reflection, get your boss, get your direct reports. So we have taken that survey format and implemented it into the sports arena. So gathering feedback, like I said earlier, from athletes and parents. On top of the coach assessment, I want to be really clear that the coach is always a part of this conversation. It's just in addition to. These are also online, and what's awesome for the organization is that you get these reports back that are going to try to elevate the data. It's not just, I'm a huge nerd and I love data, but I know that not everyone wants an Excel spreadsheet with all of your item means. Like, that means crap to most people. I love it, but so what we've tried to do is give you your highs and lows. What are your top 3 items that your athletes are saying you're kicking butt at? And where are some areas as a coach, as a team, as an organization, could you work on? Could you pivot and say, I need to focus my training here? We also do a resonance score, which measures the lack of alignment. So if a parent thinks that a coach is doing a great job and the coach is being hard on themselves, you get to say, Coach, give yourself a pat on your back. Your parents think you're doing great. Vice versa, if your coach doesn't think there's a bullying problem on your team and your athletes raise that up, like, that's really important. So we're hopeful that these 360-degree reports, as well as the self-assessments, will help coaches use their training time, their very limited training time, more effectively, or seek out the opportunities they need based on real data. I love making data available for folks to make decisions. Same thing with organizations. They can highlight their champions and get them to share their knowledge across the board, instead of implementing a training that everyone's actually doing great at. So before I pass it to Ryan, does anyone have any questions about from the huddle? From the huddle. Yes. Oh, let me pass this for you to be recorded. But you have to be recorded.
Hi, good. Thank you. Nice to see you, Keely. So the surveys for athletes, are there different ones depending on different age range of athletes?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. For the feedback that we would gather from our athletes,
Yes.
Are there different surveys depending on age range of the athletes?
That is an excellent question. Thank you so much. First of all, we developed the survey to be at a 3rd grade reading level, so it can go 3rd grade and up, but you are highlighting something that I totally forgot to mention, which is the calls for coaches are sport agnostic, they are age agnostic, they are competition level agnostic. So from the huddle, the beginning of the self-assessment and the 360-degree surveys lay out some terminology to get us all on the same page. Because in our pilot, we realized game could be meet, could be match, could be another word, and so we needed to all be speaking the same language. Some sports have multiple coaches, some just have one coach, so we laid out definitions at the very beginning to get everyone aligned to how they're supposed to be answering these questions.
That's great. And very quickly, what about language? Are they translated into other languages?
We are definitely going there. Our platform allows for 1 billion languages, but we need to get those translations in place. But yes, that is part of our product roadmap for sure. Thanks. All right.
Thanks, Keely.
Thank you, Keely, and kudos to, I can't wait to share this with our coaches. It's a great tool. Self-reflection is awesome. So everyone, I'm Ryan Graff. I serve as Vice President of Programs at First Tee. I know everyone's had lunch, second speaker, Tinley, you can get a little slow. So if everybody, just, if you would, please stand up. And I don't know, I'm not a big fisher person, but if you've caught a fish before, why don't you show me the size of fish you've caught before? Awesome. You can sit down. Thank you. I can tell my boss I got a standing ovation now. So I'm gonna be brief. First Tee is a youth development organization. We use the game of golf to teach kids life skills and character. We have a very intentional life skills curriculum, but we needed to find a way for coaches to integrate that into the game of golf and make it fun. So just I'm going to share a little bit about the program, our coach development program, but hold a lot until we get to how we assess, how we observe, and how we give feedback. So there's about 5,000 coaches along this pathway. It starts with onboarding. We have 150 chapters around the country, around the world. They start with online assistant coach training. Majority are there, 1,500 or so. When we get to level 1 training, the chapter actually leads that, and so we train the trainer model to do that. That's a one-day training. And then when they get to level 2, level 3, 4, those are 2.5-day trainings led by national trainers. And so just to provide some perspective and context around our coach training pathway. We've been training coaches since 2004. We have certainly revised, refreshed, learned, and as we get into more of the assessment, we'll share more what are some of those changes and updates have been. But I want to share more importantly, we have a curriculum for our coaches. And so we started out back in 2001. We would have kids in a classroom and we would lecture to them life skills. And then they would go outside for 30 minutes with a coach and do lines of golf. Real exciting stuff, right? So we said, we've got to find a way to get the peanut butter in the chocolate, to put sugar on the medicine, whatever analogy you want to use. And so these 4 building blocks are really central to our coach development process. So we start assistant coach training, introducing these, and then we go deeper and deeper and deeper at each higher level of training. So just to illustrate a few of these, activity-based, right? Get away from lines and lectures. Kids learn from games. Kids really don't know care what you know until they know that you care. Here's a simple one we do. Here's your first golf lesson if you don't play golf. So feel free to hold up your favorite golf ball or a golf ball. It can be yellow, red, pink, white, all right? And what I want you to do is take that golf ball and put it on your chin. Where's everyone's chin at? So kids do what you do, not what you say. Apparently adults do as well. Apparently I'm a good role model. So we start there, right? The participants don't care what the coaches have to say. Be brief with your words. Have it match what you do and model. So that's the foundational part we start with. Really about creating these optimal learning environments. It's about balancing the process and outcome. Empowering youth, right? Simple strategies. Have kids wear name badges. Use their name. Say their name. When you're with a smaller group of class 7 and 9-year-olds, get down on one knee or sit down. Get eye level when you're with them. Simple strategies, not easy always to implement. And then the last building block I'll highlight is continuous learning. So we use this process feedback called good, better, how. In the game of golf, maybe other sports, you come off and it's really easy to talk about what went wrong, the negative. And so we want to start with the goods. What is positive? What did you learn today? What did you do that you would want to repeat the next time you come to class? We do this with coaches. We do it at an organizational level as well. 3 positives. I know probably research says you're supposed to do more positives, but in all practicality, if you can get someone to say 3 goods, you're doing well. 1 better. So what's the one thing they would change or do differently as a coach the next time they come out? And then how would you go about that, right? There's lots of different ways. It's not just one way to improve upon that. So it's a collaborative process on the how. So this is our coach philosophy, our coach curriculum. We, again, layer it and go deeper and deeper as the coaches go higher up in the levels of training. So I'll stop there. That's just a little bit about First Tee, our coach development process, and what we actually train coaches to do. I'll stop there. Are there any questions? Two slides, and that's all needed. Yes.
Could you go back to the first slide?
Oh, you're challenging me.
My man.
Yeah.
So, with this is strictly just for golf, right? Or is this, okay, so like, now, my thinking was, so those coaches that already are good or believe they are well expressed, do they still have to start at level 1?
Yes. Every coach starts with the onboarding, right? Say sport train, background check, then you can take the assistant coach training. But this training is not about golf. You will not be taught anything. We leave that to the PJ of America, who's Mike's in a room. This is all about how to work with youth, how to communicate, how to create the environment, how to develop empathy and ask the right questions. So no matter your skill level, if you're Tiger Woods, you're still going to start at assistant coach training.
Perfect, okay.
Great question. Thank you. Good time for another?
Ryan, do you want to just say one thing about assessment right now? Like just about kind of what you, broadly what you guys do from an assessment?
Absolutely. So when we get to level 2, level 3, those trainings, 2.5 days, so just real high level. First day, the trainers model delivery of a lesson plan to the coaches. So they're modeling the behaviors. We then unpack that, kind of debrief, and in the afternoon, what did you notice? What did you observe? Day 2, coaches coach to coaches. So we have a coach observation form. There's these behaviors. And they observe, the trainers observe coaches coaching to coaches and highlight the goods. Here's what I noticed you implemented from yesterday that you saw. And then day 3, we actually bring real kids, and they deliver a lesson plan to kids, and now the trainers are observing again, and they give feedback using this coach observation form. I failed to mention on day 1 that the coaches get to fill out a coach observation form on the trainer. That is like the critical piece, is that the trainer models being receptive and open to feedback. Then day 2, the trainers get to start to implement that, giving them feedback through that lens. And then day 3, with the real participants, giving feedback using the coach observation form. So it's the start of modeling, being open to feedback, having this process of good, better, how, and implementing that from a training perspective.
I think we're going to kind of continue to unpack this. I'd like for Katlin to have an opportunity to share. I will just say one thing, that one of the interesting things about the structure of First Tee, national chapter headquarters supporting chaptered organizations around the country, and the relationship between the two in this process. Early process at the chapter, then moving out to the headquarters for further training. Thanks, Ryan.
Katlin.
Right. Thank you, Ryan and Keely. We're excited as U.S. Soccer Foundation to join this conversation and to represent the Million Coaches Challenge here. This is a give a mouse a cookie scenario where I'm an academic who hasn't been in the classroom for a while, and had an opportunity to submit slides. So we're going to move through them quite quickly. But wanted to give you just an overview of our organization and the multiple programs that we run and how we think about training coaches across those programs and then assessing impact with different outcomes, right, different endpoints. And so our work at the U.S. Soccer Foundation is really focused on providing access for underserved communities through innovative play spaces and evidence-based programming, predominantly in soccer. And we're looking to instill hope, foster well-being, and provide opportunities for young people to reach their fullest potential. And the work we do is centered in sort of the conversation here just generally, right? The work that everyone here in the audience is doing in your organizations, which is to decrease these barriers. You know, we heard yesterday from Tori Smith talk about the need for resources, both physical resources in terms of fields and human resources in the communities in which young people are, so they don't have to travel away, right? Like, how can we build community around sport if we can't do the sport in our own spaces where we live and go to school and work? And so we do this through one of our programs. We also look to increase the access to mentors for young people, a part of sports programs. And so our coach training really centers how do we bring best practices from the youth adult mentorship world into the arena of sport, and how do we equip coaches to sort of have that mindset and integrate those skill sets into the work they do across seasons. We do our work. We have 4 main areas of programming. The first one, Safe Places to Play, is really focused on that built environment. We don't train any coaches in this way. This is really about how do we create access to safe spaces within communities. It does intersect with our Just Ball program, which I'll talk about in a second. Our flagship program, Soccer for Success, runs in after school and in school. Our long-term version runs in the after-school setting. We partner with local organizations, WISE, Boys and Girls Clubs, other community organizations to run soccer programming that's embedded with either social-emotional learning or nutrition education. In this program, we require anyone who's implementing the program to have trained coaches. And so they go through a training that both equips them to run the soccer component that's integrated with SEL or nutrition, but also to embrace this role of a coach mentor. And so all of our Soccer for Success coaches are considered coach mentors. That's how we talk about them. That's how we name them. We have a sort of tiered trainer facilitator training that kind of like Ryan talked about for First Tee for this program, where we have a national training event. We bring folks in from local communities. We train them in on how to deliver the training, and then they go back and in their organizations then deliver this training there. Just Ball is a league, I like to say a league, non-league. So in these spaces that we now have across communities, we're looking to figure out how do we invigorate more free play. And so in this case, we train coaches as, we actually call them playmakers. We don't want them to think about the structure of being a coach and providing direction in the same sort of sense, but basically their goal is, how do I open a space for young people to free play, to be creative, to sort of engage and have more ownership over the spaces that they're in. We do equip them in training with the same mindset of being a mentor and what those skill sets look like. And then the last program, the program I'm mostly closely connected to, is coach mentor training, and this came out of our long work in Soccer for Success. We actually train coaches across all sports, not just soccer, youth sport professionals, AmeriCorps volunteers, and how they bring this sort of a mentorship hat into the work that they're doing in the youth sports setting. And so some of the things we speak about there is how do we map intentional relationship building and connection building with young people over the course of a season or a camp or a clinic. Some of the things that I think Cal Ripken raised yesterday in his presentation are some of the things we teach coaches in this training. I think he spoke about the moment something goes awry and being ready to address it, right? That's a skill set that coaches need to build, and that's part of the training. You know, how do we think about setting those early rules that sort of set the environment, the positive culture of a space, and those are pieces that are part of that training as well. We've had some significant reach to date. We're on our way to, when the Men's World Cup kicks off in 2026, building 1,000 mini pitches, reaching 50,000 coaches, and reaching 1 million kids per year with the programs that you just saw there. And so importantly for us, we're doing all this stuff in conjunction with local communities. Like, is it working, right? How are we measuring the impact of the training that we're providing for coaches? And so because the endpoints are different, because each program's different, we use a variety of tools. You know, we use post-training evaluation surveys after trainings for playmakers and for coach mentors. We use pre-post surveys for programs like Soccer for Success and Just Ball. We do focus groups. We do site visits in some of those programs, 3-month surveys. We have outside evaluation for some of our longer serving programs. But I think ultimately all of this rolls up into stories of success, right? How are we seeing this really play out for kids in communities? And so I'm just going to share some bits of data here. Some of this is in, you know, the handout that you have. In our Soccer for Success program, right, we do pre and post surveys with the young people who participate. And obviously we're seeing reports of an increased improvement in health outcomes, social outcomes, such as being able to work better on a team and staying away from antisocial behavior, and just feeling uplifted both as a community and as young people, right, feeling better about their community and their future. These environments are all led by coaches, right? So coaches are clearly in some form or fashion impacting them. And so we post-training for coaches for this program. We measure sort of their attitudes in terms of their competence, right? What do they feel equipped with to do in those spaces? We see a really high agreement with the fact that they feel prepared to enter these spaces, to lead that curriculum, to serve in the role of a coach mentor, right? And then to impact the social emotional skills that young people can develop in sport, right? In well-crafted environments, such as self-efficacy and relationship building. We're seeing similar outcomes in our Just Ball program, right? This is from Just Ballers. We only have a year of data because this is a relatively new program, pre and post surveys. From that program, we're hearing young people report that they're having increases in mental health outcomes. So 84% feel less stressed, which I think is phenomenal because of their participation. They're enjoying themselves, they're having fun, and they're speaking towards some of these SEL skills that we want them to have. They're also reporting, so here's the youth experience component, what their playmakers mean to them, right? And so they're described playmakers in some of these really positive ways, right? They're the person who saved my community, right? They've created this judge-free zone where I can be myself, and they take care of us, right? And so these are things that speak to what we're trying to implement in the training that then plays out on the field for these young people and on the court. And playmakers also are reporting sort of what they've gotten out of being in that space, and this ties back to the training as well. So developing, in terms of thinking about how they're developing the skills of young people, both in terms of on the field and off the field. This is a program, Coach Mentor Training, that's focused just on the endpoint of the coach. There's no curriculum attached to this. It's just working with coaches to really embrace the mentorship component and bring some of those pieces in. And I think here, what we're seeing just across the board is high agreement with coaches post-training that they're embracing this idea of being a mentor, right? They feel more equipped to create inclusive environments through better understanding the communities in which they work with and being able to address the needs of young people coming from underserved communities and different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then we're seeing that they're prepared to improve the lives of local youth, right? They feel empowered to make a difference in their community, and they feel ready to address social, emotional, behavior needs. And so these are all pieces that speak to the impact of the training. We also send 3-month surveys out to coach mentors and part of this program, and we do collect some survey sort of data, but we also ask for, hey, how have you used this in your work, right? Which I think is actually the most impactful nuggets. And so the first one speaks to a coach who talked about the Making Connections section and how they've utilized that in working in their volleyball programs where they're interacting with multiple young people, and they've really intentionally overemphasized ways in which they can make connections with each and every young person to make them feel valued, even in these short programs. The second one speaks to the idea of addressing behaviors with empathy. A coach tells a story about a player on an opposing team doing something that impacted their team negatively, and them going over and saying, hey, it's okay, and giving them positive encouragement, and his team going, why? Why would you do that? It's the opposite team, right? And opening up the space intentionally to talk about how empathy and perspective taking is super important. And so these two things, and many stories like this, right, speak to impact. And I just want to leave here, I think for us, importantly, what are those individual stories that roll all the way up through the data and the long-term programming? And so this is one of our coach mentors and trainers and now facilitators, Diego. He's been with us since 2011, started in the Soccer for Success program as a coach mentor, was trained in. He then became a trainer for Illinois Youth Soccer in his community, and then a facilitator of trainers across the country, and he also trains in coach mentor training. His first team was a first grade team, and this young woman, Camila, was on it. And he got a call this spring saying, hey, coach, I'm graduating. Will you come to my signing day? And Diego went out to signing day. It turns out that her experience, he was her first coach. It led to a passion for the game, and she's going on to play college soccer. Now, college soccer is not the outcome that we're looking for across all our programs, but the fact that she found a space that was safe to engage in, to learn, to love the sport, right, came from what was led by this coach mentor. And this is not the only story. I mean, uniquely, Diego also led a coach mentor training in April where a young man came up and said, hey, did you coach at Green School? And he was like, yeah, I did. And I said, you were my coach mentor from 1st through 3rd grade, right? And so now we're seeing players who have gone through the program come back and get traded in these programs. So want to leave you here because I think, look, this can feel like a lot and messy, especially if your programs are quite diverse in your organization, but there's ways to get to these stories of impact that can impact how you change and update and make your training for coaches better, and also how you communicate that outwardly.
Let's give a round of applause. I'm going to make an executive decision here. So let's sit and we can start our panel. I actually want to open it up for questions now and just reflections from you, things you'd like to ask the group. I will chime in with questions that I have, but I'm conscious that I'm already looking at the clock. We're almost going to be out of here. Let's just start getting into your questions. I'm going to find you with this mic because we want to hear that. So I think we've got a question here, which we'll jump into.
So it seems like you're all chatting about emotional social skills, which I'm on board for. doesn't seem like every coach that goes to a coaching training is interested in that, though. Maybe the way that they used to be coached or anything. When you run into a coach who's like, nope, we're doing push-ups and suicides, deal with it. How do you kind of try to crack that?
Want to go first?
Sure. So yes, I can relate to that comment and question. I will say, having given the 20 years and a culture of feedback and the way we kind of do things around here, and known as a character development life skills organization, those that are coming to volunteer know what they're signing up for. Now, with that being said, in the first 5 years of coach training, there would definitely be trainers pulled aside like, what are you talking about? Grip, stance, posture. That's all you need to know about golf, and that's what I'm going to teach. So interestingly enough, some of our best trainers were those initial folks that were very resistant. There are a handful to this day that have stayed with us that still train other coaches. They were the ones pulling us aside and saying, you can't do this. You have to teach the X's and O's. You have to teach kids grip, stance, posture. So we got through it. Over time, the culture has developed that that's what we're about. The knock is we don't produce Tiger Woods and Annika Sorenstens. So be it.
How do you deal with survey fatigue?
I can take this one. My company deals with this a lot, and especially coming out of pandemic where the only way to collect data was through a survey. It happens. And so I have 3 practical things that I think can go for any survey or focus group observation. 1, captive audience. So if you're trying to do one of these surveys with your coaches, the beginning of the session, not the end of the session when they're trying to go home, because you are taking time away from them. You have to elevate this and say, this is important to us, so we're going to take our time in this session to get your feedback. Number 2 is, at the very beginning, tell them what this is for and why you want their feedback and what you're going to do with it. I mean, I get asked to do surveys. I'm like, well, why? What are you going to do with it? Like, so I want to know the end result and why I need to spend my time on this and why it's valuable. And number 3 is to follow up on that promise and tell them, once you do have the data and the results, this is what we heard, this is what we found, this is what we're going to do with that information. And thank you for your time, for doing the survey, participating in the observation. I'd love to hear from y'all too if you have any practical guidance, but those would be my 3 things to kind of overcome survey fatigue. It's never going to be a perfect process, and the last thing I'm going to end with is, part of me even feels like putting the survey out there shows whomever's doing it that this is important. So with From the Huddle, you're showing your athletes, if you're putting that information in front of them, this is what your coach should be doing. Like, they should be calling you by your name. So even if you don't get the responses that you want the first year, you're setting the beginnings on a path to a culture of like, this is what we should be doing. This is what we want your response on, parents. And so it's like very empowering and on the path to creating a feedback culture.
I'm going to ask one more question. How do you use your data? Because I'm actually thinking about, you're like, here's what we're going to do with this survey. What then do you do with the information after you collect it?
Sure.
Either internally or externally, like for purposes, yeah.
Yeah, so part of attending coach training, after the training, you have 1 week to complete a post-training survey. It is actually the first requirement to complete before you move to the next level of training. So we get 100% compliance, which I don't know if that's good or bad. But the most interesting question, we asked a handful of things, try to keep it short, but the most interesting thing is an open text. What did you learn from this training? Stepped my toe the first time I used AI, ChatGPT, was we had 20 pages of open text responses to that question. And I aligned that by level 2, level 3, and asked ChatGPT to summarize that. And thankfully, 90% of what they were saying aligned with the training objectives. So I did have to go read to verify that ChatGPT was actually summarizing what I thought it did. But hopefully for the future I can rely on it. But what we do with that, we identify training gaps. Like what are we missing? There was definitely 1 or 2 items at level 2 we were missing the ball on. Like coaches were not saying they're taking away this particular aspect. So for us, it's like identifying training gaps. But we also like to know, what they are taking away, how they value the training, and they do give comments about certain trainers, which helps us to know what trainers are going to stick around and which ones may have to move on.
This might be best for U.S. Soccer. I'm stuck. We're in the recreational space. I feel like we preach to the choir a lot. And what I'm seeing is more of the challenge with the club and the travel and the elite. And I don't know how we could get them to the recreation people. They drink this really wonderfully. But how do we effectively deal with the components where these coaches are trying to create the next Tiger Woods or Mia Hamm or whoever it may be, and to get them into this, because we're not seeing that in the recreational space very well.
I think it's a great question. It ties a bit to the first question as well. In the Coach Mentor Training program, we train a variety of coaches working at different levels. And I think you're right? In many cases here, we're preaching to the choir and the importance of this piece. It's the work we're doing, the Million Coaches Challenge, right, to train more coaches in positive youth development. I think what's helped us as we have framed the training and the need for it to different audiences is to appeal with what they want. And a lot of times in the competitive space, right, it's about performance outcomes, it's about development in that sports skill. And we know from the highest levels, the coaches, the Pep Guardiolas, the Steve Kerrs of the world, right, they're incredible relationship builders. They don't get the impact from their athletes on the game without having a good relationship with them, right? To be able to implement the tactics, to get them, to convince them that certain technical pieces need to be improved. And so if we can lean into the fact that at every single level, a coach has to be able to develop high quality relationships with youth and connect with them in important ways. And if you want youth coming from your community, right, you probably need some skill sets to do that very intentionally. That seems to lead to a little bit more buy-in. But I think also leaning into the sport leader, right? Who's in charge of that club? Who is in charge of the league? How do we make this as important in terms of thinking of it as a safety component for young people, right? Social emotional safety for young people as we do concussion training, right? And safe sport training.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you want to maybe come up here?
Hi, thank you for your work and for being here today. I noticed from the Huddle survey that there are a couple questions about addressing sexual abuse. And so I'm mostly wondering about maybe the curriculums that each of you are serving around. How do you kind of tease out the differences between mentorship and coaching and grooming behaviors? Because, we know a lot of parents and families may recognize behaviors like one-on-one attention, time before or after practice, really investing emotionally in kids as being positive coaching, but those are also some really early warning signs of grooming. So I guess my question is, how do your programs speak to either helping coaches toe that own line for themselves, identify problematic behaviors amongst their coaching peers, and then being able to know what to do about it?
That's a phenomenal question, right? Because when we start to think about training in this realm and positive youth development in conjunction with things like safe sport, that question's really important. I think a couple of things. One thing when we talk about training coaches and mentorship, we want to tell you what you can and should do when you interact with young people, right? You're gonna have to take training that says what you can't do, and this is not in opposition to that. This should align with. I think often we give volunteer coaches, parents who are entering the coaching space, to help out their son or daughter's team, who've never had formal training in coaching. We're only telling them what not to do, and they leave with little tools with what they can do. And so if we position those things well together, I think that provides a little bit of a boundary. I think the second thing is, as we're equipping them with skills to connect with youth and youth from different backgrounds, we continue to emphasize, one, you need to follow whatever the rules and policies are of your league and your state and your county, right? Like what we're talking about has to fit within that. We never advocate for one-on-one conversations, in closed spaces, right? It's always about how do you have those interactions out in the field that are interruptible, that meet all the different needs that come about in safe sport. And I think the other piece, the big piece we emphasize is you need to know all this, not because you're a mental health professional or a social worker or a psychologist, but you should be able to recognize when you then need to and can connect them to those resources in their community. And so we're really equipping them to notice the moments when there are needs for these other pieces, and then how do they, and be prepared to connect.
I think so. It's a great answer, and it's a great question. One of the things I think it brings up as well in this conversation is terminology of questions and survey design, right? Like, what are we asking when we do a survey? Because what we're asking is going to move us down the path of what we're trying to find out, right? What are the outcomes we're after? And it's an interesting one because, Keely, I'm going to sort of turn to you. In thinking about one of the unique things about From the Huddle is it's looking specifically at coaching behaviors that are built on calls for coaches. And it's really interesting nuance in how we think about impact are our sort of evaluation tools, are they looking at coaches' behaviors, coaches' feelings, coaches' attitudes, or other sort of outcomes that we can connect to those things, right? And the From the Huddle survey is specifically saying we are looking at the behaviors that sort of this evidence base says produces the outcomes we want, right? Yeah.
Yes, and it's kind of the beauty of the survey and what I think, just because it is so straightforward. It's positive coaching behaviors. And so there's no, like the satisfaction and the perception surveys are they can be subjective. And if for someone like me who feels, if I was an athlete taking this survey, perhaps a little vulnerable to speak out against my coach who's in a position of power, this survey is about like, did your coach do X, Y, or Z? Yes or no? Yes, they did it always. No, they did it. Like, I don't agree that they don't. Like, it gives me a straightforward way to answer those questions. And just to sort of tie back to your point about calls for coaches is also about sort of these universal behaviors that were outlined in the research. And so it can't get into these very important but more nuanced behaviors, but it does open the door for a coach to be like, that is a behavior that I do need to, am I thinking about these training? Is my club or organization offering these trainings for me? And if not, I'm seeing that this is a positive behavior that I should be doing, so let me fix that.
I will say that if you read the impact statement that we've developed for the Million Coaches Challenge, we do still really value those sort of like confidence questions, the how prepared do I feel. There's a ton of work in that space, because I think that's one of the things that we can sort of more tangibly in a post survey ask, like, how do you feel now? You know, rate yourself now on some item, and that's valuable and it's important, right? And I think it's really getting clear on what is the thing that matters here that can be reliably evaluated or assessed. Okay, a couple more minutes. Other questions, things that are coming up, even comments or reflections.
Hi. So I use, I'm in Michigan. We, as of right now, for our coaches training, we do utilize the U.S. Soccer Foundation's coaching and mentor training within our regular training. And I'm very excited about the surveys as well to kind of implement those without the seasons and everything. What I think my biggest thing is, too, is with the first tee, like, whatever you're doing, I want to do. So, like, do you have that, like, shareable? Do you guys come out to us to do the training? Like, how does that work? Like, you got a great model. Like, how can I get that? Yeah.
It's a great question. So currently, like, if you want to go through coach training, you have to be part of a first tee chapter. However, I'm happy to point you, we had a lot of consultants, a lot of outside help. I'm happy to connect you with those individuals who can help build for your specific sport or activity that you want to do. So give my card afterwards, and I can point you to those that can help you do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can you pass
It's more of a comment, I suppose. So the coach mentor training, can you hear me?
You're fine.
The coach mentor training, we saw the information several weeks ago. So I had all of our coaches do it from recreation. We even had some coaches in training. And we had some professional coaches, all different levels. Unbelievable response. And it was eye-opening because every training that they've attended has been the grip, the technique, the formation, and it's got better. The world's changing a little bit in the coaching realm where we're adding more how to how to speak with parents, how to get them on your side, how to get buy-in. But I'd recommend that training to anybody. I actually had our coaches, we paid them to do it. And part of their responsibility was, tell me a couple of things you learned. I was getting paragraphs. This is the first time they've ever come back like excited. And it was like, whoa, they've been coaching for 20 years. So brilliant stuff. I'd love to see more of it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so in the last 3 minutes, I suppose, what's one message to the group that you want about how to do this stuff well or better? One thing you want to leave the group with.
I mean, I can start I guess these two are powerful examples of you can build a culture where folks, I mean, Katlin's data is incredible, and like you have much more, you have 20 more slides of data, which is great, but you've gotten folks to give you feedback. So I would just encourage everyone to, like, it sounds stressful and it sounds hard, but like you can do it, you can start doing these things, and now I'm gonna pass it to the experts.
Yeah, great question. I think start with the end in mind. Like, what is it you want to see your coaches doing? The behaviors, not how they feel, not are they equipped, but the behaviors you'd like to see, and start at that North Star, and then back into how do I train, model, reinforce, give feedback, and start small. I mean, don't try to boil the ocean, right, is the saying. Start with some effective outcomes that you want to see, and then find the experts and the models you want to have to reinforce that.
Ryan, that's exactly what I was going to say around starting small, right? I think especially with new programming, or you're just starting out, like pick out a couple of things that you're interested in knowing more about in terms of the impact of your training, and then you can evolve from there. And I think, can you center what those impact pieces are in the communities, the local community needs you're working with? I don't think there are some universal things that we want in terms of coaches and coach behavior, but they're all localized, like in terms of how they work with youth. And so the way you ask it or the way you think about impact maybe and should be slightly different, right, than our programs in our different places.
You know, my last comment would be, I think what's interesting about this space is we have three sort of very diverse approaches. Doing something is better than doing nothing. And it's going to be an imperfect process, but we have folks out there who are working really hard to obviously, develop curriculum, identify key needs for young people that coaches can help support, obviously developing amazing trainings and programs, and we've got to continue to build our capacity as a sector around our it's not just about data, it's about insight building, using information, and whatever information helps you grow your program and have the impact you want. And I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and I think it's an important conversation to keep having. So thank you very much.